Welcome back. I hope that you had some great conversations and made some new connections or cultivated and nurtured some older friendships at the regional breakouts. I look forward to continuing these conversations within the regional circles of the Florida Herbal Hub so that we can keep growing these connections to foster a stronger herbal community in Florida and beyond. I'm so grateful now to introduce you to my dear friend and teacher, herbalist Maggie O'Halloran. Maggie is the education director at the Florida School of Holistic Living, and she's also the primary instructor for our Roots of Herbalism and Family Herbalist courses as well. Maggie's also a mom, and she has a rich history of working both in her own personal life and professionally with health, with nutrition, and with plant medicine. You can find Maggie almost every week on the Florida School of Holistic Living's YouTube channel. We'll put the link here and also in the chat. You can visit every week and you can see dozens and dozens of plant profiles that Maggie has shared over the last several months and will continue to in the coming weeks. So if you get wet your whistle, if you get piqued of your interest for plants with this virtual weed walk, then be sure to visit Maggie over at the YouTube for more plant goodness. Now, without further ado, I'm so glad to welcome you, Maggie. Thank you so much for sharing about Florida plants with us today.
Hi, I'm Maggie O'Halloran. Welcome to the Florida Herb Conference Wild Weed Walk. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you're here. When we're talking about going on a plant walk, I just want to cover a couple of things that you all probably have heard lots of times and have probably even said yourselves. When you're thinking about wildcrafting, you have to consider a few things. One of them is making sure you have permission. So we are currently in my backyard here in Central Florida, near downtown Orlando. And I know that I have permission to harvest and hang out with the plants and do whatever I need to do. If I go into a state or a national park, I know that's not a good idea. So if you have a friend or know someone down the street that has a lot of property that you can identify some of the plants that we talk about, just make sure you have permission. So permission from the land current owners, and also permission from the plant, making sure that you get grounded in your body and you ask permission. And I usually can tell immediately if it's just not a good time to harvest, if I get distracted, or I get a real no. It happens. So permission. The second thing about permission is that if you know the land, you know what kind of herbicides and pesticides are using, and you know how that's going to impact your body if you choose to go ahead and consume those things. You also want to consider distance from a main road. I say it's about 100 feet. That's what I hear most of the time, about 100 feet from a major road. Here in Central Florida, we have a really major thoroughfare called I-4, and I would go at least 200, maybe 300 feet from that major roadway. But if I live in a really rural location where there's a dirt road and not many houses along the road, I might consider harvesting a little bit closer to the road if it seemed appropriate. Just remember that those plants are taking in a lot of the things that we don't need and making it into wonderful things that we do need, like oxygen. So if you're harvesting from the roadway, you specifically want to think about some of those plants that are taking in some of the toxins that we humans can put out. And that's through our mouths and through our cars and through our garbage and things like that. So knowing all that is really important. We're going to take advantage of the fact that we're virtual. As much as I'd love to go on a plant walk with all of you in the real time and person, we have a great opportunity for me to be able to show you not just my backyard, but a few other locations here in Central Florida. We'll be hitting a walk on my neighborhood. We're going to visit a local botanical garden. And the whole time, you're going to be able to drop your questions into the chat to the right of your screen if you're watching this live. If you are watching virtually, just remember that you can still send us emails asking any questions that you may have to clarify. I'm Maggie, I mentioned. I'm one of the educators at the Florida School of Holistic Living. I've been in love with plants since I was a little kid. I am from a really big family, and I started the first 11 years of my life on 27 acres. And although I had all of those people that I could play with or fight with, depending on the day, I spent a lot of time by myself in the woods, and that's really where my heart feels the fullest and sings. So thank you for joining me in one of my favorite places. And before I show you any plants, I want to share with you a couple of the books, or 4 of the books, that I really enjoy taking with me if I'm going out on a plant walk or I want to research some of the plants that I'm considering. One that would be relevant for folks outside of Florida, a lot of these plants are more North Florida, eastern seaboard related. I really like Peterson guides that have Stephen Foster, who is one of the first herbalists I was introduced to in Arkansas back in the early 90s. He's still a photographer and spending time in nature and sharing information about the historical uses of plants. Another one is Medicinal Plants of the Southern Appalachia, from Patricia Christy Howell, as a way to connect with some of the plants and their historical uses. For Florida folks, I highly recommend Peggy Lance's book, Edible Wild Plants. Peggy Lance has been leading edible plant walks for 50 years here in Florida. We really honor her connection with the earth and her ability to share that information in her book with her wonderful pictures in the middle. If you're like me and you want to see how your edible plants and medicinal plants can be incorporated into your landscape, there are a couple, if you are local to Florida, that I recommend. Monica Brandeis has been writing about herbs and spices for Florida gardens for a long time, and she offers her wealth of experience in using plants in that way. We have more updated versions as well. Florida's Best Native Landscape Plants. So this book is really going to be thinking about how the plants in your yard will impact your local pollinators and keep the plants that are native to the lands that you're on having lots of room to grow. When we're thinking about wildcrafting, we're thinking about those pollinators. We're thinking about the other critters that might be accessing those things for food. So a general rule whenever we are going out to wildcraft is taking 10%. The thing is that if I go to a location and I take 10% of a plant population, and then you come along and take 10% of the population, and then your friend who told you about the location also comes out and takes 10%, you can see how that could really deplete the plant population in that area. When I am harvesting, even in my backyard, I want to really consider the impact it's going to have on the local wildlife. I live near the middle of the city here in Orlando, and I often leave some things in my yard that I might be tempted to harvest just because I know it might be the only place in the neighborhood that is full of grassy lawns and lots of chemicals to get rid of some of the pollinator plants. And I save those for the animals. I get rewarded with a beautiful bird dance and sing and song with the butterflies daily back here as well. So you'll have that reward as well. So let's get started on that plant walk with a plant that Passiflora ACA is a family of vining, beautiful flower plants. This is not our Florida native Passiflora incarnata variety. This is an edulous, but the leaf shape is really similar. The way they connect to the stem is really similar. They all have these spiraling tendrils to help it connect with whatever the plant is choosing to climb on, like it is on this arbor. If you're thinking about identifying it, these are some telltale, well, that isn't, some telltale ways of distinguishing it. Just know that Passiflora has leaf shape that looks a little bit like a mitten, but also this shape with the 3 lobes. The parts that are used are the vine and the leaves. And this, if you're reading an herbal text, you've heard a lot about passionflower, and sometimes herbalists will refer to this as passion vine when they're thinking of the medicinal uses. Passiflora incarnata, the Florida species, looks very similar to this edulous species. The Passiflora incarnata has been historically used for a long time for a lot of different things, including pain relief, and one herbalist out of North Carolina, Juliet Blancaspor, described the impact that Passiflora has on the body, or Passiflora incarnata has on the body, by the flower. You can all imagine that beautiful purple-white flower. And the way that it has sort of a spiral in the middle, and how Passiflora can positively impact your ability to be able to bring together your mind and let go of that spiral thinking to really focus on whatever the task is at hand. I like to incorporate Passiflora incarnata into my life in teas or tincture, and it really helps me to let go of that spiral thinking if I have a lot on my mind, as we all do in these days. And it's beautiful. It grows really beautifully as a vine. Just know that if you choose to have it in your landscape, all your neighbors will also have it in your landscape, in their landscape. So make sure that you're really committed to keeping it to the location in which you plant it. Passionflower. Next, we have elderberry, elder tree. This plant is technically a shrub, but you often find it referred to as a tree. It's the same plant. It just has this ability to look like a tree with the nice trunk that you might see if you're out on a hike. And then it's valuable to know that it propagates by these runners. So if you have one elder, you likely have more around. So I have this beautiful grandmother elder and then little smaller elders that are growing up there. So you can check out the leaves. This is one leaf with 3 lobes. And notice the leaf shape. The trunks and the branches have historically been used for things like fence posts. There's a lot of herbal tradition with the elderberry being like a grandmother in the garden, watching out over the other plants.
In Harry Potter, the trunk is used to make the elder wand.
So if you are a Harry Potter fan, I hear that the wand is made out of the elder trunk.
This part right here.
So it has a lot of historical uses with the leaves and the bark, and I don't spend a lot of time on that. I mostly have experience working with the berries and the flowers. And the flowers we don't really have on the tree, on this tree right now. There are some trees around you that might have those lovely white flowers in an umbel at the top. It's a really nice way to identify this plant. The flowers have a historical use of being able to bring down fevers. And you all know the fever is the body's way of really helping to support the immune system and burning out all the cooties. A real technical term, trust me. Even my nurse friends say it. So we don't always need to bring down the fevers, but if you're a person or your loved one is a person who sees like pink elephants when they have a fever, then elderflowers can be really helpful. Or if there's you're experiencing a condition where bringing down the fever would just make you feel a little more comfortable, elderflowers have a long history of being a part of an herbal care for fevers and colds, along with yarrow and mint to help bring those fevers down. The berries you're probably all really familiar with. The berries have a lot of qualities, but mostly what we hear about for elderberries are the high vitamin C content and the antiviral properties. There's been a lot of study around working with elderberries for their antiviral qualities. And I've even read about how Tamiflu was studied next to the elderberry syrup, extraction of the elderberry, and they go neck and neck. It's really helpful in being able to support the body in overcoming the flu strain of viruses. Elderberry also got a lot of attention about a year ago because a lot of folks were talking about the cytokine storms that could be brought on by having this potent antiviral immune system support in the body. So just be mindful of that if you're considering incorporating elderberry or elderberry syrup into your life. Make sure that you have an understanding of how it impacts your body. Otherwise, those berries, the birds love them. If you want to have elder in your yard just for the birds, it's a really fun way to let those populations that are migrating through Florida through the winter have access to those berries. It's really quite a show. I like using the flowers and the berries in teas and tinctures, but I have to say the elderberries and elderberry syrup are probably my favorite way. Elder vinegar is also a historical way of incorporating the elder into your life. And you could take those berries and dried or fresh. I'd recommend dried just because it can be easier to work with the elderberries if you're out and you're harvesting. I either put the elderberries on their umbel into the freezer and then take a fork and take the berries off or pick them off one by hand. It can be a really meditative process, especially if you have friends around and you can talk about how fun it was to get eaten up by mosquitoes while you were harvesting it. You take those elderberries and either put them in your dehydrator, which is what I'd recommend if you're in Florida. There have been folks that found it to be really easy to take either the berries or the flowers and lie them out on a baking sheet and put them into the oven, especially if you have a gas oven, just not turned on at all, just that pilot light is enough to take the moisture out of the air, and leave the oven door cracked just a little bit to let the moisture leave your oven. If you have an electric oven, I've heard of folks having success just with the light bulb on inside the oven to be able to get the moisture out of the air. In Central Florida, I don't know what it's like in North Florida. I'm assuming it's similar. We just have a lot of moisture in the air and a lot of mold spores and fungus and things like that that can impact your ability to really fully dry a lot of these plant materials. So just use caution if you decide to dry your elderberries on your own without some type of dehydration mechanism, and make sure they're fully dry before you incorporate them and that they don't have anything growing on them. Once they're dried, you can take a jar, fill it half full and with the dried berry, and fill up the jar completely with vinegar. Put the lid on, shake it up. I usually put it in my fridge at this point. If you live in a more northern climate, it's okay to leave it out on the counter as more of any way you would make a tincture. But here I like to put it in the fridge. And then after a couple of weeks, I'll strain out those elderberries and use that vinegar in things like salad dressings or adding a little vinegar to soups or stews at the end right before I'm going to eat it. It can be a really nice way to bring those elderberries or the antiviral qualities into my life without making a sweet syrup. It can be a really nice way to get the antiviral properties in that way. Another great cootie fighter I happen to be standing right in front of, another great cootie fighter, and this is our Biden's Alba. It's elder in that it likes full sun, but unlike the elder, which prefers a lot of moisture, the Biden's will tolerate a little bit more dry ecosystem. The flower is edible. It can be really fun to throw onto salads. It has a square stem, but it is not immense like most of our squared stem plants. It's in the Asteraceae family, so that's the composite flower family. Disc ray flowers, each of those little yellow centers are flowers, and each of these are their own flower. Disc and ray. So a lot of the actions are antimicrobial, and those antimicrobial actions are so pronounced that Stephen Herod Buhner, who has the book Antivirals and also a tick protocol book for Lyme disease and those co-infections, recommends Biden's Alba, our very own Biden's Alba, that grows specifically in Florida, but up most of the East Coast as well. In different varieties, the Biden's Alba prefers warmer weather, so we have it here pretty much year-round. So we have access to incorporating the fresh plant into our lives. I know some folks who enjoy juicing the leaves to access those antimicrobial properties, antiviral properties, broad spectrum antibacterial properties, general cootie fighting properties into their lives. Biden's Alba was also, I heard tell, I don't know how true it is, but I heard tell that the USDA recommended the use of Biden's Alba in the place of spinach. Yep, you heard it. It has so many nutrients in those leaves, and I prefer the small, delicate leaves if I'm going to use it like in a salad or something. I find the thicker leaves can cause stomach irritation, so you want to be mindful of that. But they are nutrient dense. They make a relatively nice pot herb if you saute them with a little butter or ghee or coconut oil, whatever makes you happy. Throwing it into stir fries can be really nice. And notice the leaf shape. Let's see. Here we go. Serrated edges. And historically, all parts of this plant are used, but it's mostly the aerial parts. The flowers make a really nice toss into a salad, if I didn't say that before. So let's head out and talk about a plant that the plant genius, Andy Firk. If you don't know Andy Firk, you should definitely look up floridaforaging.com. He has this really wonderful website, Andy Firk, F-I-R-K, that is a wealth of information and resource about a lot of our Florida plants and plants that have naturalized here or been used in landscaping long enough that you see them out in the wild. It can be a really great resource. He has wonderful pictures and information about each of the plants. And he is the one that really helped me understand the importance of knowing what plant I have. Common names for plants can really trip you up if you're going to a landscape store and picking up plants, and you think you have a certain plant, but then it turns out it's not exactly what you were looking for. So behind me is ginger. And Andy Firk taught me there are 75 different gingers that grow in Florida. Many of them are used in landscape purposes. There's one kind of ginger that has well-known historical uses of using medicinally. Ginger is lovely. You've all had it. It's wonderful in tea. It's those rhizomes that grow pretty shallow in the earth. If you've grown it, you know how easy it is to have access to wonderful antimicrobial action of ginger. It gets the blood flowing. It's nice and hot to get parasites out of the body. It's a wonderful way to interact with a plant through eating ginger. Well, many years ago, I went to a store and picked up a ginger that I let them know I wanted to use medicinally. I was really excited to be living in Florida and out of the colder climates where ginger just would not grow. And I put it in the ground. I waited a couple of years to harvest some of those wonderful rhizomes, and it didn't smell right, it didn't taste right. Don't recommend doing that. Make sure you have 100% accuracy before you put anything into your mouth. I sent pictures to Andy, and he was like, I actually don't know what that is. Send me a picture and you have a flower. It turns out the ginger variety that I have here is lesser galangal. It's not the ginger officinale that has been historically used. Officinale in a botanical name means that it's been used in a historically used by a group in Greek or Roman apothecaries where the tradition was to write things down. So it likely was used in a lot of other places. We just don't have those written records in the same way. This is a plant that has some information on the use of the ginger, and I'll still keep it around, but it's not the same kind of ginger that I can use to eat or make my tea with.
Would you like to touch on, you mentioned that it helps with the parasites.
Yeah.
Would you like to touch on that for people who may not be aware of how often and how much we consume them?
Oh, sure. This is a great question. So parasites, if you're living in a tropical climate and you're walking around barefoot, you're likely exposing yourself to parasites daily. And so knowing things like pumpkin seeds or things that have been historically used to eliminate those parasites or make your body less hospitable to parasites that you don't want in your body. There are things that are living on our skin and our eyebrows, and they're all there, and they're living happily, and they don't really impact us mostly. But there are other parasites that are kind of annoying. You know, they make kids' butts itch, but it's helpful to have things around and part of your regular daily life that is helping your body to eliminate those things. Great question. Remember, if you have questions, you can always drop them to the right of your screen, I think, and we'll answer them as soon as we can. So that is ginger. If you're out on a hike and you see plants that look really similar to this, ginger, they have in common the way that they grow from the ground. You can see it comes from the ground, and it has and these longer leaves. Ginger and turmeric, they have really similar structures. So you want to just make sure that you know what you have. My recommendation, if you're considering having ginger in your landscape, you want to have access to it, is to get ginger rhizome or root from your local health food store, someplace that you know and trust, and let it sit on your counter or in your fridge until it sprouts. And then basically put it on the ground and cover it just with a little bit of dirt, and you'll have ginger in no time. Yeah. Hi, here we are with common name Goldenrod in the Solidago family. We have 19 native Florida species. Right now, they are in Central and South Florida probably too. They're looking pretty dried out. Soon we'll have these beautiful green, ever-present leaves with bright yellow flowers. And goldenrod seeds are lovely for me to spread around, and they are so big, and the pollen is so big that it rarely causes people to have allergies. Goldenrod unfortunately gets a bad rap because it sometimes grows near things like ragweed that cause histamine responses in the body. You can see the seeds here, the pollen that you can't see as much right now, but the pollen is bigger flakes, so it doesn't really cause that snotty nose experience. In fact, a lot of people like to make a tincture with the non-flowering aerial parts of goldenrod for things like a lot of snotty mucus related to allergies. It can be really helpful for that. We have 19, did I mention that before? I'm still kind of blown away. There are 19 different species of this plant in Florida. It makes a lovely roadside beauty anywhere you go. It also makes a really nice landscape plant because you get the lovely yellow flowers. It mixes in with a lot of other native species. The pollinators really enjoy it. It likes disturbed soil, which most of us have in our gardening, our lawns, disturbed areas, especially if you're trying to avoid having a lot of grass. Goldenrod could be really lovely in your pollinator garden. Let's go find another plant. Here we are in Winter Park, Florida at Mead Botanical Gardens. If you have any questions or comments while you're viewing this, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the right side of the screen. There's a chat area that you can jump those questions into, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. If you're watching this as a recording, feel free to send us an email if you have any questions at the Florida School of Holistic Living. Here at Mead, we have a plant commonly known as tropical chickweed, Drymaria cordata. It's a similar size of the more northern variety that does grow here in Central Florida. It's not year-round like this tropical chickweed, common variety, common name, tropical chickweed. They are both similar size. The Drymaria cordata does not have the signature hairy stem that Stellaria Medea has. So the tropical chickweed, most folks that have access to this plant recognize it because of those wonderful seeds that attach to you and your clothing and your pets and tag along and spread the seed everywhere. It's a really wonderful, low-growing, weedy plant. The leaves are edible. They're pretty tasty. I like to incorporate them into pesto recipes or salads, either cooked or fresh. The stems can get kind of tough the older the plant gets, and so if you're using it fresh, you might want to nibble on the newer leaves. They're tastier. This plant has a long history of use in tropical climates, specifically from the continent of India, for colds and headaches, and even I've seen some data around using it for cancers and things like that, much like the more northern variety, Stellaria Medea. I said variety, but they're not actually that related. But Stellaria Medea you will see in a lot of herbal books and herbal protocols, and although they're different plants, Florida herbalists often use them sort of interchangeably, in that Drymaria cordata is a little bit drier than the Stellaria Medea of the northern variety. Tropical chickweed, tasty, tinctured, supports the lymphatic system, supports the respiratory system. Next to our dollarweed, you can see that size comparison. And those familiar with the Stellaria Medea, you know that this is a really similar size of that plant. Over here, we have another plant that is edible. I don't know of a lot of historical medicinal uses for this one, but it's a pretty tasty plant, and it's a really fun plant to think about how common names come to be. I have a bunch of them here. I'll just hang out with this little one. So the common name, one common name is peppergrass. It's Opidium virginicum is the botanical name. Another common name is poor man's pepper, and a lot of my herb friends like to call it rich woman's pepper, and it really helps you understand how these common names come to be, because this plant, if you nibble on the leaves or the fruit, which are these little tiny pieces here, they taste like pepper. So it can be a really fun edible weed that you can use in your meals to spice them up a little bit.
May I ask where those names came from? Because you've got poor man's pepper and rich woman's pepper. So what is it that made people go from calling it poor man's pepper to rich woman's pepper?
That's a really good question. So this idea that herbs are for a certain socioeconomic group and is sort of used in modern culture to be a bad thing, right? And we all know as herbalists that it's kind of cool. This is our history. This is what we're grateful for, that we're able to connect with the plants and be in the land and eat the things that are around us as a gift and a treasure. So I think that changing the name, common name, to rich woman's pepper is lots of female herbalists saying, hey, let's change the name of this because it's really this really wonderful weed that we can incorporate into our lives in this really positive way. So that's how common names come to be. Here we have commonly known dollarweed, hydrocotyle species specific. The hydrocotyle or dollarweed, Pennywort is another common name, has a leaf attachment right in the middle. Some folks like to nibble it as a trail snack. I won't nibble it here because we're near a sidewalk, and as friendly as dogs can be, I'd prefer not to eat their urine. So I wanted to compare and contrast the size and shape and the way the stem attaches to that dollarweed. One of my teachers, Emily Ruff, taught me that ponyfoot right next to it is a really nice way to notice the difference. That ponyfoot has, common name ponyfoot, the stem attaches on the side, and with dollarweed it's really clear, it goes in the middle. And another way to notice the size is it growing right next to that chickweed I was just sharing about. The stem. We have another of our water pennyworts. Earlier I was mentioning the dollarweed that is a water pennywort. And right next to it, they often grow side by side like this near a water's edge, is a plant commonly called Gotu Kola. Gotu Kola you've probably heard in herbal classes and in materia medica, that it is often used to bring nutrients to the brain. It helps with mental clarity and getting rid of brain fog. It's beautiful, low growing. The leaves have a similar feel as that dollar weed. Gotu Kola has other historical uses for healing skin and promoting liver and kidney health. And some folks think that this promotion of liver and kidney health is one way it helps with brain fog, just clearing things out and helping you to think more clearly. And you can see the difference in these two, where the stem attaches to the leaf from the side on the Gotu Kola. And for the dollar weed, it's a different plant we were talking about yesterday that can be a nice trail nibble, but it attaches in the middle. Here we are with pine. And pine that we're talking about today is any of the pine in the Pinus species. It's spelled P-I-N-U-S, Pinus species. So this is a longleaf pine. And if you come in closer, longleaf pine is one of our Florida native pines that we are really trying to protect and acknowledge and honor. It is commonly seen in our Florida landscape, and the way that the needles produce 3 needles on each of these is another way of knowing that it's a longleaf with the 3 there. Also the length, they can get up to 18 inches. But we also have in Florida, we have the slash pine, sand, spruce, shortleaf pine, and loblolly are pine varieties that are more northern Florida, but this variety is all over Florida. And really, when we're thinking about nibbling it, incorporating it into our herbal apothecary, as far as I know, any pine on the eastern seaboard would be included. And those are pines in the Pinus species, P-I-N-U-S. There are a few pines out on the west coast that I'm not really sure about. I haven't gone into depth with. But pine, if you are in a place that you can nibble it, can be really fun to nibble. It's a really nice way to understand what astringent is if you're working with herbs and trying to understand the taste of herbs and how it impacts your body. Nibbling a little bit of pine gives you a really nice experience with that. It's really high in vitamin C. I like to incorporate it into my tea blends, even in the summer, but especially during the winter when we're fighting off all the things and need a lot of extra vitamin C in our lives. I really like pine needle and lemon balm tea made into popsicles during the summer. It's like a special kind of magic. But pine has a really long history of use in fighting off infections in the body, and the pine sap or tar that you find on wounded pine trees has a long history of use in first aid application, like applying to wounds. If you are out in the field and you're far away from medical support and you want a temporary solution, it can be really nice to incorporate that into your life. But just remember that that comes from a wounded place on the tree. And sometimes when I'm out on a hike, I can see this like girdling of the tree that someone maybe was trying to get the pine to produce the resin for medicinal use or whatever they were planning to use it for. But this is a small. So girdling of a tree means that you're cutting off all of the nutrient flow that's going from the roots to the top of the tree. And this is a much bigger pine tree, but a lot of the life is under the bark and in the surface area of this tree. So if I cut a line all the way around this tree, I would be cutting off the access point for that veining that happens from the roots up to the leaves, all the way up there and all the way down. So sometimes if I'm out on a hike and I see a cut that's smaller, roughly the size of a piece of bark, then I know that's someone that's trying to be really mindful of not taking too much from the tree. If you are intending to do that, make sure you're working with someone that has a long history of working with trees in that way, and you're collecting in a really sustainable way that's not harming our tree. Plantago. Plantago virginica is what we have here today. Folks, more northern states and all up the East Coast, you have Plantago asiatica, and there are other varieties, lanceolata, major, like I said, asiatica. This is the Florida variety that we have this time of year, virginica. What a couple of things they all have in common when you're looking at them are the veination in the leaf that runs along the length of the leaf, long ways. They all have these wonderful seed stalks, and these are kind of young seed stalks. Soon, each of these little tiny green pollen areas will have little black seeds on them, and those black seeds have been used for bulk laxative. The leaves have a long history of use as first aid for cuts and healing of wounds. I incorporate it into my life both for its mucilaginous qualities and its astringent qualities that can be really helpful for tightening and toning skin, and that's from mouth to anus, you know, the whole digestive tract. I've seen historical uses for Plantago varieties in that way. I like to have long infusions of Plantago or drink it in tea blends to help if I'm recovering from anything respiratory related. You can find it all over the ground. It's super low growing, and those seeds can be really nice to scatter in your own yard. I know it's like the poster plant for a lot of companies that are trying to get the weeds out of folks' gardens, but we really find a lot of medicinal and edible qualities if you want. I prefer to eat the varieties that have a bigger leaf. The virginica is the smallest leaf. The major, as you can imagine, has a much bigger leaf and grows similarly super low to the ground, but you can definitely identify it from those seed stalks. Plantago. Sorrel. Wood sorrel, clovers, there are a lot of common names for this plant. So we have 3 different varieties of sorrel that grow in Florida. This is one. This is not our native Florida species. This is the violet species. You can tell by this gorgeous little flower. They all have things in common. One of them is that they have 3 to 4 leaves typically, but some have up to 9. This plant is edible, tastes a lot like a sweet tart candy. It's one of my son's favorite things to nibble when we're out in the world, and it's his favorite to show to his friends, and it's his favorite to be reminded about making sure that you're picking from a space that doesn't have herbicides and pesticides and things like that. It's also high in oxalic acid, and there are a lot of other foods that we eat commonly, things like spinach that also have oxalic acids, and there are some questions about how safe it is to eat this regularly, and from my understanding, it's okay as long as you're incorporating it into your diet in a way that it's not all oxalis all the time. And when I say oxalis, this is a species, there are several species in that are considered oxalis, and they all have their common names. Like I mentioned, this one with the purple flower is violet. It's the Oxalis debilis variety. The yellow flower, the Florida native, has its own botanical name. And then we're going to go check out the broadleaf wood sorrel, and it looks a little bit different in the leaf shape, but it has a lot of similar qualities. Wood sorrel has a little different leaf shape. Peggy Lance describes this as being like a boomerang shape. You can see it's a little different from that other yellow or violet shape leaf that is a little more like a heart in my mind. These can range in color from this green to hues of red and more purple. And it's all the same plant. They have this variation in their color. You can see this one has a little more purple. Wood sorrel, high in vitamin C, has a nice tangy flavor, has those oxalic acids that are found in a lot of the foods that we eat, like spinach. So you just want to be mindful, and especially if you're someone who avoids oxalic acids, then you want to avoid those and just appreciate their beautiful flowers that are such a lovely part of our hikes around Central Florida these days.
How would somebody know if they're supposed to avoid oxalic acids?
Well, that's a great question. So folks that are prone to kidney stones avoid oxalic acids or other kidney balance issues. So that's one thing. Great question. Our next plant is the beautiful, we have one here, we have one here, violets. The Florida variety is the whiter to purple violets. These self-seed, so if you have them around on a trail or when you're hiking, keep looking because you'll see more of them. They have this nice heart-shaped leaf, and see the edges of the leaves. That is a great way to distinguish the violet leaf. They're all low growing, about 3 to 6 inches tall typically. The flowers, this one is technically our common blue violet, but you can see that flower has a little smidge of purple. I think the one on this plant has a little more purple if you want to check it out. It's our common blue violet. It's really common, especially here in Central Florida. And they grow anywhere from zones 8 to 10A. And they're from this more white to dark purple. And it's the same plant, much like our oxalis. They have the variations in the color of those. You can see flowers here, but the beautiful and magical fairy aspect of the violet is that their seeds are actually underneath. You can see this little seed pod. And this seed pod, the seeds are spent, but you would see these tiny little black seeds inside for the seeds. And they self-seed really easily. So once you have it, it can be a really nice addition to your garden. You can see it looks really lovely in this pot that I happen to have here, and with all of the blooms. The leaves are really demulcent and mucilaginous. They have a really long history of being used in cough remedies, especially for sore throats. The monks in the medieval times referred to violet as I'm just going to get out of the sun, herb of the Trinity. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Florida. Because of all of the healing properties that they felt it contained. So that soothing quality, that mucilaginous quality really is lovely for nibbling. You know, if you have a little dry, scratchy throat on a hike, it can be really nice to take a little nibble and chew and swallow and let it do its moistening magic. It also has salicylic acid, and that salicylic acid makes it really useful for a lot of skin and topical uses. I don't know if you've ever heard of violet cream, but violet cream contains the salicylic acid. I'm not sure if you go out and purchase violet cream if it has so much violet in it. It's mostly that salicylic acid that prevents the growth of things like, historically used to prevent the growth of things like warts and acne. Just keeping the skin smooth is how it was historically used. It can also be a little bit of a pain reliever, and so folks like Susan Weed have recommended all of these wonderful benefits in violet to use for major things like cancer. I definitely use violet oil as like a breast massage to move the lymph in the breast and get things moving along with something like red clover, which I know we just talked about all of these other plants that are called oxalis and look a lot like those clovers that you might see around March, especially if you have the last name of O'Halloran, that are really different plant from red clover. Red clover is in the Fabaceae family. It's the state flower in Vermont. It's not something we grow very readily here, but something you might want to look into because it is wild growing in a lot of other parts of the United States and in climates that are much like the northern part of the United States. So violets, wonderful in tea. Really enjoy it there. I like to nibble, especially the small leaves. The flowers have been made into jams. I really enjoy watching the flowers and looking at them growing. And remember, it's technically not where the seeds are coming from. The seeding flowers are down below the leaves. So you can get a little bit magical on your trail when you're hiking around and think about those little fairies growing underneath with the seeds. That was violet. Thank you for joining me on this virtual urban hike, wilderness, my backyard plant walk. Thank you for being here. It's such a joy to know that we can all gather in this way. If you want to know more about a lot of these plants, the Florida School of Holistic Living has a YouTube channel that you should definitely check out. There are some of the plants that I mentioned in this video and really didn't have enough time to really share my heart about all of the things that I love about it. So check out the YouTube channel and you'll find out more information about those. I can't say thank you enough to my wonderful camera person that throws at me these powerful and wonderful questions while we're engaged in this plant walk. She's been giving up her time as a mom and a person in the world to really support this process. So thank you, Rita Sotolongo. I couldn't have done this without you. And I look forward to seeing you all on the actual trail sometime really soon. See you later.
That was so awesome, Maggie. Thank you so much for strolling us around and bringing us so close to these plant friends that we love so much. I hope all of you took good notes. If not, you can always revisit the replay and check in again. And remember, Maggie has lots and lots of plant profiles on the YouTube channel that's in the chat, and we'll link it again so that you can have easy access. Be sure to visit that and check out some of the other plant friends that Maggie introduces us to there. Well, we've had a full day, and I think it's a time for us to have a little break, grab some dinner, maybe take a little walk, or do some of those stretches that Shannon taught us earlier. But you won't want to be late for our final evening session. It's going to kick off at 7 p.m., and we'll be meeting right here. So I can't wait to see you then. Take care, and we'll see you at 7.